What's up, boys? Welcome back to another episode of Terran School. Today I'm going to be teaching you guys proxy Hellion drop, proxy starport Hellion drop, I should say. This is a little bit of a follow-up video to the last one, where I was talking about defending the T drop, because proxy Hellion drop is a pretty strong counter to that. But in general, it's such a good, strong build anyway, that I wanted to make a separate video for it. So there we go. So yeah, very basically said, proxy Hellion drop is just harassment. It's not a killing move, but a lot of the time it ends up actually being a bit of a killing move. We're going to do a proxy starport Hellion drop off of 2 bases. And from that point on, we're just going to go ahead and continue into the macro game. Now, this replay is actually pretty long. I'm going to show you 10 minutes of gameplay. So I'm going to show you the build, the follow-up, the first timing attacks to hit and stuff. That's all going to be in this video. Now, I think the follow-up is also very important. The first steps, by the way, are just barracks into gas, very standard. I think for this build, the follow-up is pretty important. I noticed when my follow-up wasn't sharp, my damage would not even feel very significant. So I worked on my follow-up a little bit, and these days whenever I do it, it feels pretty good. Even when I don't get that much damage, it feels pretty good, to be honest. So I'm going to make sure to teach you guys the follow-up properly as well. Now, yeah, in the early game, there's not too much to think about. One thing that you should remember is that you actually have to SCV scout, because you're going to make a proxy starport, and one thing with proxy builds like that is that you never want to make yourself suspicious. So you don't want to send out a random SCV to a random direction at a random time, right? So the way you do it usually is you will send out an SCV, a normal scout, and then when you have the opportunity, you will diverge to your proxy location. Now this build is going to go with a marine first, else you're not going to have enough gas. So do remember that. Now one small tip I can give you with marine first is that you will always hide it. You will only show your marine if you have a guaranteed probe kill. So if the probe is like here harassing your SCV, you can move it out. In other cases, just keep it up the ramp. Don't reveal that you're doing that. And yeah. So you can see my SCV scout is just going back. I'm going to wait until I run into his probe. And then after that, I can send it to where I want to proxy. Now, I actually have a really good proxy location on this map, but I also know that whenever I make a video, there's also going to be Protoss players watching it. And when Terrans are going to spam it, people will know about it. So I'll probably recommend you to get your own proxy spot instead of copying this exact one, because else you might end up getting blind countered. But yeah, you just go for one marine, then factory before the reactor. That's important. As always, check out the replay in the description if you want to look at the game slowly and really copy the builder step by step. But yeah, the basic things are you go marine first, and then factory, and then reactor. If you get the reactor first, you're not going to get your Hellions out in time. So then you swap over the factory, and you're going to build your starport right here. Now, if you do want to copy this location, let me just tell you that you actually need this literal exact spot. If you build it a bit too far to the right, the adept will see it. If you build it a bit too far to the left, the watchtower will see it. But once again, probably should think of your own spot, so you don't get blind counted, right? So we're going to open up with 2 Hellions here. We're going to make 4 Hellions in total. As soon as we make those 2 Hellions and we have money, you can actually start the tech lab here over in the barracks. Now I'm going to talk, I think this build has 2 weaknesses, and I'm going to talk about the first one quickly. One weakness of this build is when your opponent goes for really fast adept chrono over the map. And you would think 2 Hellions can deal with it pretty well. But what ends up happening is if your opponent would go low ground gate, chrono them across the map, adept, stalker and stuff, you can survive, but you're gonna have to like keep spamming Hellions to kill the units. And obviously when you're going for a build like this with a proxy starport, it's just not efficient to do that. So in some cases, like sometimes Protoss only sends 1 adept. In that case, it's fine, kind of like what happened here. But if they do commit to like adept, stalker, stalker, chrono across the map, this build is not going to be your best choice. So if there's something you meet a lot, you might want to do another build or adapt. Anyway, obviously we're going to make a medevac here. I would recommend personally not sending the SCV back, because you're going to get a little bit more mining from it, but at the same time it's also going to increase your chances of being scouted. If you want to see what the scouting pattern looks like, by the way, as you can see, anything passing through here will barely not see it in this location. And then at home, after 4 Hellions, I'm going to swap these over. Now this is a little bit debatable what I'm going to do here, but I always go for the tank from the tech lab. Now you could also go for a cyclone to defend like an oracle, for example. But what I think is that if you go for a proxy Hellion drop and the opponent has an oracle, it's better for the oracle to be at home. If they base trade, like the oracle kills your workers, your Hellions kill the probes, I think the Hellions actually kill more. So my logic is that since that scenario is good anyway, and you don't really need the units at home to defend an Oracle, you might as well go for the tank, because the tank is actually 10 times better against Blink. If you make a Cyclone and you end up playing against Blink, very bad, very bad. So all we do with this starport is make one medevac, then we're going to send the starport back, and this Hellion is going to go straight in. Now, the second weakness, I kind of talked about it a bit already. In general, is Stargate. But I think there are some scenarios against Stargate where you can still do damage. The worst thing you can see is one Oracle into Phoenix, because an Oracle just does so much damage against Hellions that you cannot unload the medevac properly without like just losing your Hellion straight up. And then the Phoenix after will clean up your medevac. If you play against straight Phoenix, I actually think it's not that bad, because they will most likely only have 2 and you'll still be able to get damage. I guess if they go Phoenixes plus blind batteries, then it's also a bit rough. Now, if we're talking about obviously you're 100% going for probes, right? There's no question about it. You shouldn't really worry about anything else than probes. This is pure probe damage. If you're wondering what a good probe count to kill is, I think 6 or 7 is already pretty good. If you kill 5 or less, it might be a bit questionable if it was worth it. If you kill 6, 7, it's already pretty good. I think in this case I'm going to kill 9, which I'm pretty happy with. Then of course at home, after you get the tanks going, the Marines, you're going to make 2 extra barracks. Obviously you have a starport already. And besides that, it's just going to be a pretty much standard follow-up. Though do definitely make sure to keep producing these tanks. Like you see, we're going to have 2 already. So even if a Protoss would counter now, we're going to have 2 tanks ready and we're going to be good for that. And yeah, these barracks need to come after, then the eBay. And it just looks pretty much normal from here. Beautiful 9th probe kill. Yeah, I'm gonna make a 3rd tank as well. You can actually go for 2 tanks only and use the tech left for the barracks, but you know, when I do damage, and I know Max Packs, he likes to do 4-gate blink a lot. In this game wasn't the case, but yeah, if your opponent does play 4-gate blink, just get a 3rd tank, be safe, don't worry about it. And also the reason, just to circle back to the other video a little bit, is why I said it's good against DT drop. Because when DT drop is a little bit of a greedy build usually. So when you arrive with the Hellions, they will most likely only have 2 units or 3. And yeah, it's very likely you will even kill 20 probes. One thing I would recommend against DT drop is to actually keep the starport or like land it wherever it is and make a tech lab and get a Raven out. Like getting a faster Raven is nice, and you will have to save some scans. Like you can see, this one has a lot of energy. Right now I don't need it anymore, but during the attack you should save some scans just to be safe. And I think in this case, it's not super necessary to keep the Hellions alive. Like I always tell you guys, if you go for a mine drop, it's really good to keep a little bit of pressure, right? Like AFK your medevac here with 1 mine inside so you can attack later. With Hellions, it's not really the case, because Hellions is a bit of a snowball unit. You have 3 or 4, you can one-shot probes, very dangerous. You have 1 or 2, not very useful. 1 or 2 Hellions not really gonna do a lot. If they have a battery, they literally don't even need to send a unit. Like 2 Hellions can literally not kill anything under a battery. So if you do go for the Hellion drop, it's a bit different than the mine drop. Not really necessary to keep them alive. Obviously, if it's a bad trade, like there's 5 Stalkers waiting, don't just go in. But yeah, getting probe kills is more important than keeping them alive. Little bit of tank positioning advice here is that against Blink Stalkers, typically you want 1 tank in the back here, right? And 1 tank covering the wall. Then as the game progresses, when you get more and more units, you want to start thinking about the prism harassment. So then you want to get 1 tank, like maybe, like this one is actually pretty fine, but usually I make it against the CC to cover Stalkers being dropped behind the mineral line. And a similar situation here, tank against the CC to cover all the areas where Stalkers can be dropped. And at that point on, you should not really be taking any damage against Blink Stalkers. Though it's actually pretty important that you do that, because yeah, 4 Stalkers kill SCVs really fast. So if you do actually let 4 Stalkers get in, they kill 5 SCVs, it's going to be pretty painful. Like I always talk about the perfect saturation. You always want to get up to 47 SCVs on 2 base before making all your stuff. You see, if I lost 5 SCVs here, I would have been down to 37. And that, you know, it's going to take me a lot longer to get back to the SCV count that I want. So taking care of those things is better than like reacting to it. That's what I always tell when I do coaching as well. Is you want to be prepared for the obvious things and not like have to react to it. You know, having a lot of APM is nice. Not needing that APM because you're doing the right thing, even nicer, right? So yeah, I mean, this looks super standard. Definitely I would not recommend going for 5 ranks after this build for sure. Like, the follow-up is pretty strong, but you do need some time to get your Marauders going and everything. So if you 5 ranks, I feel like it's just gonna hit that hard. So I would definitely recommend going for the 3rd CC here instead. And then later you can add 2 barracks. Yeah, the normal stuff. I think you guys know that pretty much by now. I'm still gonna show how it goes. Obviously, I'm gonna go for my signature double medevac drop as I like. I think against Blink, you always have to be a bit careful. If you guys are wondering the reason why I'm sending them out this way instead of going for their main, and that's just kind of a mind game thing, you know. Like, this was actually a tournament match I was playing, by the way. So, actually, I can clearly notice a difference for myself, by the way. I feel like normally I show replays where I clearly make a lot of mistakes. But since this is a tournament match, I feel like you can really tell that I was tryharding. And yeah, so the reason is that I send it this way is because people are kind of used to my medevacs going to the main. So a lot of time against me, they will have like an observer chilling over here. If you find it is the case as well, just switch up your medevac path, you know. It's really no big deal. In this case, he scouted it, like he had a little stalker scouting over here. But else I would have dropped behind the base, pushed with my army through the front. But in this case, I'm just going to go frontal. One thing I do want to say is that normally against Colossus, I would always advise to not go straight up. But in this case, since I actually played 3 tanks, advantage of the build, by the way, fast tanks, like I said, you can actually push straight on. As long as you respect your own siege lines, like, don't go too far in front of your siege tanks and stuff. Like, this is still a good trade. If I would have sieged them a little bit later, I would have lost 2 tanks for free, and it would have been a disaster. For now, it's just good trades. Against Colossus, you always have to be super careful, though. If you ever feel even a little bit... Like, I think most people will have this instinct. If it ever seems a little bit like it's starting to go wrong, you should just back off. I think you're going to see that here as well. Like, I'm trying to find a hole, trying to find some damage. It's not really working out. And against Protoss, you always have to respect the 8 Zealots that's warping in, right? Like, if you play against Protoss here from my POV, this is a tiny army. But I always have to respect that 8 extra Zealots could be warped in at any point. Yeah, he actually has 8 gateways, as you can see. So, as soon as it's starting to go a little bit wrong, if you feel a little bit in danger, just back off right away. And that's what I'm gonna do now. I pushed my luck. Honestly, it kind of worked. Like, this was a nice amount of damage. Can't complain about this. And then after this, a really good move to make is to simply do single medevac drops with Marines or Mines. If you play against Colossus, I feel like I used to have a lot of videos about this on the past on like general macro patterns against Protoss. If you play against Colossus, typically you want more Marauders. As you can see, 4 tech labs here. You don't want to be making too many Marines. So you can either do a single medevac drop with Marines on the right side, Widow Mine drop on the left side. You know, use those units that you have to their advantage. They might not be too good in the battle, but they're going to definitely help you out in killing workers, creating distractions and all that. Obviously, always make the anti-warp prism turrets. You know, try to be as solid as possible. Like I said, the game is not so much about having a million APM, but just creating a good situation for yourself where you don't need it. And simple stuff like these turrets really work. If you are sending a medevac drop in here and a Protoss sends a prism here and doesn't look at the same time, the prism dies, your drop gets in, and it's just a really good situation. Like, we all know what it feels like to get a prism into your base without realizing it, you know. In this case, the prism was already back. So I, you know, had some units there, making a Viking. And actually, I know it looks kind of questionable, but this is actually a pretty good situation for me. In general, by the way, if you want to judge how well your game is going against Protoss, you can actually look at the worker count as well. If you are even with the Protoss on worker count, or in this case 2 ahead, that's actually fantastic. Terran, I would say usually is about 15 workers down throughout the mid game. Like 45 or 47 against 60, that's totally normal, right? If you're in a situation where you're 60 against 60 like here, nothing to complain about at all. And of course, like, stuff like this makes a really big difference. You see, he's creating some damage here, he's getting disruptors. The game looks a bit rough in some areas, but just because of the Widowmine drop, okay, that was a little bit lucky, by the way. I saw a really long drag there. This Widowmine drop creates so much pressure. As you can see, I killed 9 pros, but even the workers that he has are not going back. And if you look at the supply, obviously I took a good fight. It just makes a massive difference. If he had 60 workers still, and he wasn't distracted, he would have pulled back in time, etc, etc. So, very important to keep creating those distractions with small mine drops, small marine drops. And yeah, now I did explain a bit more about the macro game than I was planning to, because this game was mostly about the Hellion drop. But I do hope that I showed the build order correctly, as well as the follow-up, to give you guys, you know, a good path to your ladder games. Anyway, that's going to be it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Adios.